just share my screen. Okay. Is my screen visible? Can respond to me either with like a thumbs up
Yes,
or
Tanu.
super. Thanks, Shania. Okay. So yeah, coming to so as we just got into a glimpse, right? So we are going to be talking and speaking more, rather it's going to be like a discussion. We're going to be speaking more about how how essentially would you go about running a chatbot program, right? So now, amongst all the NGOs that we work with, for a few of them, chatbot is like a sole program that they run, or is their major tool to drive the impact, or for some it's a part of some on ground or in on ground intervention that they are parallelly running with, right? So now this today's webinar will be about getting a sense of how we want to look at like running a chatbot program for a specific organization, and what are the steps, or essentially some things that you should keep note of consciously when you go about doing something like this, right? So before just we go ahead, like I'd just like to get a sense of what comes to your mind when you hear about running a chatbot program. The first thing, it could be a phrase, it could be a word. I will just request participants to just put that out on chat, or could also unmute and speak, but feel free to like put that down on chat as well. Could be a phrase, it could be just a word. Yeah, when you hear running a chatbot program, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Wait for a minute. Or you can
Assistant.
unmute. Yes, sorry, could you repeat?
Assistant.
Assistant, okay. Diksha said EdTech program. All right. Okay. Rahul says assistant. Shania, what about you? Akash?
It's a mix of bot and human.
A mix of bot and human. Okay. Personalized assistant. Okay. So, understood. So, a lot of y'all have just touched upon what we are going to do, right? I would also say that this, what you just spoke about, is a glimpse of what you would essentially want to do, right? If we have to sum it up in one sentence, right? Running a chatbot is actually about it's not just about the tech, right? A tech is one of the part of how you want to go about it. It's a long, essentially a longer exercise of defining what the problem is, what is the problem that the chatbot is trying to solve, and is it, first of all, even trying to, is it solving the problem in the first place? If yes, then how can this tool, this technological tool, be used to scale it into a program level? So it's more than just the technology part of it, but also looking at how you can put together the purpose, strategize that into scaling it into a program, right? So ideally, right, like when you would want to think or envision anything that you want to roll out, you would first come across the idea or the problem at hand. Like there's some idea that you have in your head which you think that okay, could potentially solve a larger problem, right? So that's your first step of ideating and brainstorming what's in your mind. Post this, when you have that idea in mind, it is very important that you actually validate that idea, right? And when I say validate that idea, I mean that, say for example, your idea is that this particular chatbot that you launch could potentially say, let's take a use case example that okay, you have like an NGO who work with government school children of say 6 to 8 standards, right? And they're working towards improving their mathematical skills, for example. So the assumption is that okay, this particular tool, this chatbot that we launch is going to essentially improve the math skills of these students, which will potentially reflect, say, in classroom participation or their actual math scores, right? So at that point, that's an assumption, or that's a belief that this is something which will happen. But it's very important that you validate that belief, that okay, I am looking at it as a chatbot, as a WhatsApp tool. Do the end users also look at it that way? Do they really think that okay, this chatbot, this particular thing that I talk to on WhatsApp is actually going to help me or not? So what do they perceive your product to be, and is that in line with what you initially thought of? That's something which is very important to validate, because if you don't validate that, uh, actually scaling it directly is, I would in quote unquote look at it as like, say, not really a good effective use of your cost and effort, right? Because you don't really know whether it actually was even a problem in the first case, because that's something also some people really come about and figure out at the time of running the pilot. So the process would look like that: you look at a idea, you go about validating that this idea is going to indeed solve the problem, and then look at effective methods to scale it into a program, right? um Going ahead, always, right, which has been the norm, you first start with understanding, like, I mean, why is it that there is a need for a chatbot program, right? Like a common pain point that we want to look at in general is the fact that whenever you want to deal with a small group of audience, keeping them engaged, keeping them to come back to your product is fairly easier, because you can actually directly go and reach out to them. But when your conversations grow, when your user base grows, handling or managing that same sort of an engagement at scale is a consistent challenge, right? So, and when conversations grow, right, like, it's very important that we put a structure to it, because if you don't put structure to it, the focus, it's very very easy for the focus to like deviate, right? Like, say for example, now you get hundreds of messages, right, on your WhatsApp. If you don't have a plan on how you're going to respond to each of them, there are very high chances that, say, you miss the messages, or you give like different responses of the same questions to different people, right? So having that understanding that we need to put a structure whenever there is when the user base grows is very important, right? And so, given this, the first thing that we will always pick is try and get a good grasp of understanding the why of your product, right? Like, why is it that you need to build a chatbot? Is the chat building a chatbot even necessary in the first place? Ask questions saying, maybe, why, like, if we go ahead with the similar example, right, of the NGOs that we picked up on, it solving helping the 6 to 8 grade children solve, improve their math skills, right? First, maybe try and question, okay, is it sending out that material effective way to do it through WhatsApp only, or how should we go about doing it? Like, do we think that sending weekly assignments or quizzes is something that can help them improve the skills, or is there another effective way which is easier for them to grasp, right? But while envisioning this down, right, you can have like many use cases. You can build a chatbot to, say, collect feedback, to maybe, or you can, looking at the problem of scale, you can build a chatbot to, say, minimize your manual effort that goes into, say, automating your daily tasks. But a larger question that we need to always keep in mind and think about is that running a chatbot program is not very different from running a program on ground, right? Like, they are analogous to each other, because both of them are going to involve you to strategically think, plan, and execute what's in store, right? So essentially, uh, running a chatbot running a chatbot is just about, say, getting your tech correct. Like, say for example, that the chatbot sends messages correctly. It also, there are no bugs that come by everybody's being able to receive it on time. That is just about running the chatbot as a product. But when you want to run a chatbot program, it is a little more than just tech feasibility. It's about thinking that this particular tool, which is the tech, is actually driving impact on ground or not. So that's a distinction that needs to be clear when you go about designing a chatbot program, or actually testing whether you can run a chatbot program or not. right? Going ahead. So now, when you know why you want to build or why you want to run that chatbot program on ground, right? Or, like, I mean, as a program, the next thing you need to know is, who are you building it for? And build it according to their needs, right? Like, because the idea here is that, who are my users, and for the set of users, what's the right product that can be built. So to get that understanding, it is very important that you go and speak to your end users, because they are the people who can, if you can, like, I mean, of course, if you can, that's the best way to understand how your users really look at this particular or envision this particular product, right? There are a bunch of questions that you can ask, like, even before going into designing the chatbot in the first place. Like, say for example, what is the language that they're comfortable with? Have they ever used or do they use WhatsApp in the first place? Have they used a WhatsApp chatbot before? Do they understand, like, okay, if there are buttons that are sent through WhatsApp, what do you do with that button? How do you engage with a chatbot in general? How do these user demographics lie? Or what is it that in a chatbot that they find encouraging, or what, essentially, what is the thing that can make them interact with your chatbot, right? All this information, these are just a list of questions that I thought about, but like, there are 100 things that you can just ask them, so that you get a strong understanding of who your users are, because you're going to be building it for them, and it has to be built according to what they need it to be, right? Specifically, again, if we shuffle back to our example that we started with on the NGO for improving math skills, right? The first question, probably, which is worth asking, is that, do children even get access to the phone? If they do, what is the time of the day that you get access to? Because only then it is, according to that is what I will essentially schedule my entire chatbot operations, right? And this, using this information along with your behavior that we learned for improving user engagement as a part of restart code, right? The MAT formula: motivation, ability, and trigger. To get this information along with these three criteria will essentially help you get a strong understanding of who your users are, and how you can create a user centric design according to their needs, right? Moving ahead. So now, you know who your users are, right? So now, based on this, you will have to basically design or not design, I would call it, like, I mean, design a script in a manner that they can understand your product, right? There are certain, again, things that need to definitely keep in mind, like, when you're looking at writing the script, right? This could be, again, the way you do it uh, is about using, like, say, that, like, that as a mode, right? You can do it either on, like, a simplistic Excel format, or you can even create like a actual flowchart design, how you would go and do it on the flow editor. But certain things that you need to definitely keep in mind when you're going to put the script across is, always start your conversation with a strong value proposition, right? What is, when I look at a chatbot's message, why should I go and engage more with that product? What is the value that it is adding to me, which will make me go ahead in the particular conversation? So that's very important, that you open with a very clear value proposition, show that what's in it for them, right? And of course, this has to be like in line with what your user also needs, right? During the conversations, again, like, follow simple techniques of keeping messages short, not very long messages. Keep it simple as possible. Maybe now, again, going back to the example that we're referring since the beginning, for kids, now we know that a very long message when you send on WhatsApp, essentially, if you have to scroll a message to just read it, there are higher chances that I will not read that message at all, right? So keep it as short as possible. If you're now speaking here with children, speak to them and understand that, okay, is it that they find messages with emojis more interactive? Is that something that they understand better than just, say, plain text messages, right? And another thing which you should ideally follow, at least across your throughout your chatbot journey, is maintain a consistent tone and like basically a persona of your chatbot. Right, today if I am addressing you as a user in a certain way, maintain that consistent style across the chatbot's journey till the time say a user drops off. Right, because when you give confusing or inconsistent tone or styles, there are higher chances that I will not look and read at the chatbot because of the questions on credibility. Right. And another very important thing, right, we are building a product which is tech based, but we are building it for real users. So it's very very important that we always include all the fallback messages that are possible. Right, like we should not ideally expect that a user is going to follow the rule base that we have set in our flow. Right, it could very much be the case that okay, I'm expecting them that they maybe send me a text message, but at that time they sent me an image. It's very much possible. So now how do we tackle situations of that sort? And what should it be that we convey at that time, so that the conversation does not break, but at the same time I'm acknowledging what the user has sent. Right, so it's very important we also, like, I mean, keep note of all this. Right, and last bit is end always with a purpose. That is, so now if the conversation has ended, it should always be the case that okay, now how, either if it's a pull use case, how is it that a user can come back to your chatbot if they wish to? What is it that they need to do if they want to come back? If it's a pull use case, what is it that will make me come back? Have that communicated very clearly at the end of your message, because you don't want essentially the conversation to end there. Right, but instead motivate them to engage further. So that's very important. Right. Yeah, so that's about putting a script together. There are, again, as I said in the beginning, there are multiple ways that this can be put together, either on an Excel sheet if that's simpler, wherein you put like a conversation between the user and the chatbot. I've linked that in the deck. When I share the deck, I think you'll have easy access to it. And the other formats would be to actually put that down in a flowchart uh, in the beginning itself. Right. Yeah, that's about writing the script. Moving ahead, so now you have a strong understanding of who your users are and how they're going to, at least how you believe that they are going to perceive the product for. You also have a fair understanding of okay, how is it that I should communicate it in a manner that they understand your content. Now we want to actually transform this entire script into your flow, into your actual chatbot flow, which is on the editor. Right, now, to build the flow, again, of course, a best thing is follow the best practices that have been also put out in our documentation. And second bit, like something that we went over in detail at the time of the session in the restart pod. Right, things like, I mean, having following a consistent nomenclature, not having like dangling nodes anywhere unless intended in your flow, or always like having no endpoints wherein you know, also can figure out that this is something which is encountered an error for. So follow the best practices to create a flow on the Glyphic platform using your blueprint or your script that you have prepared. And once you've created that, ensure you do one round of like a vanilla testing of your flow. Right, that a how it should look to the user, it's looking as expected. And very important, which also sometimes get missed, is look at how the data is flowing in the backend as well. Right, a very common example could be, which generally gets missed when you do test. Right, say for example your flows have like some sort of like a counter that gets updated at one particular juncture. Right, so essentially updating a counter will require you to write like a basic expression, right, on your flow, in your flow editor. So when you test, try and go back to your contact, either if possible extract the data from BigQuery and check if the counter is getting updated correctly or not, or is it moving into some error node, right, or is it moving to invalid code, because that could be a simple case of the expression being incorrect. And you might now, if you don't test that at the moment, you might actually encounter that, say in the middle of the pilot, when you see a lot of records with like invalid code for that particular variable. So ensure that front end, it is looking like the way you're expecting to look, and also in the back end all the data is getting fed correctly, right? Yeah, that's on, that's on building the flow on the editor. And after all this, you have, so say for example, I have built this particular flow on the editor, right, and I do this one round of testing. What also is very important is, after this I send this flow out to your internal team to test, right? Because uh, generally what happens is, like, if you have another team within your team only reviewing the flow, it's basically like a fresh set of eyes, fresh pair of eyes who are going to review the flow from a very different perspective, which will help you identify certain gaps which you could have potentially missed, right? So it's very, especially if possible at that time you could send it out to your on ground team, because they are the people who are most close to your end users, right? So in case you might think that, okay, I maybe bolden a lot of words in the messages that will grab their attention, but you could actually, you would it's very possible that you actually receive a feedback from your on ground team that no, that's actually putting them off. We have seen them uh, get put off when they have seen some other messages on the chatbot. So things like that is something which your on ground team can highlight very well, right? So yeah, like that's very important that you send that out to your team to check out if there are any visual gaps that need to be fixed to in the process, that come in the process of rolling it out as an MVP, right? Besides this, again over here, this is also a very good opportunity for you to check again if the data is flowing on the back end correctly, which you have also done in your first round, right? Here you'll, the only addition over here is you'll have more data points to look through. So it will also give you a broader picture of, say, in at scale, if when the data is coming, if there is any problem that might potentially occur or not, right? And yeah, like, I mean, so given all this, this is the time where you can put together and change any modification or make any modifications to your existing setup before you launch it out to your larger pilot, right? Moving ahead, so now, you have like your basic setup that's ready, right, for your pilot. Another very crucial thing which you need to take into account is basically your the way you go about onboarding the users to your platform, right? Because that's your first ever interaction that they have with your chatbot, right? There are again multiple ways that you can go about doing it. Here, for example, one of the very common ways is that you actually share the keyword with your end users, or you use like a link which has the keyword in it, right? This is a very commonly used method that is put across. The only thing now again in this, right, a lot of times which does get missed, like in terms of cons for this, is that a lot of times if the users are not very tech savvy, what's also possible is that it's not very intuitive that when I click on the link, I have to actually send the keyword as well, because when you click on the link, it's going to just take you to, say, your chatbot, right, as a number. So it's very possible that it's not very intuitive. So things like that is something you want to take into account when you're actually looking at finalizing some strategy, right? Also, what could happen is, like, say, if a lot of times, unless it's actually told, users might not really save their chatbot's number, right? So after initiating a conversation also like this, it's very possible that your chatbot actually goes scrolls down through your chat, right? And it's very difficult to retrieve it in future, again making it again less likely for the user to come back. So things like that, like, is it something that you want to consciously tell the users that, okay, you need to save the chatbot's number, and this is how you can initiate your conversation ahead, again, in case you need it to be. That's all something which you need to include in your onboarding strategy if you want to use it, do it through a keyword, right? Another approach that could be done is what we also follow when we check demo flows, right, in all these webinars, is you actually give us QR code for users to scan. Again, a very common hesitation in this is that, again, if the users are not very tech savvy, it creates some sort of an assumption that this is something like sending money, because they're familiar to looking at scanning QR codes, like, say, when you do a GPay or a Paytm payment, right? So that's again a perception that's there. So that can initially cause hesitation for users to even try. So these are certain things, like, I mean, which you need to, like, keep in mind. Like that can even happen, for that matter, even in your first process wherein you're sending a link, because that's also something. It could be very much the case, right? Like it could be, if I'm also very very tech savvy, I can think like, okay, I have a link, how do I know that this is not suspicious? Like why should I click on this link at all in the first place? So things like that is something we need to like include. Third method again is a fairly intuitive method, is like actually initiating a flow by giving a missed call to your chatbot number. This will involve you to integrate it with Exotel, wherein when you give a missed call, essentially a flow should start. But again, over here, from an organization's point of view, a very common thing that we need to keep in mind is that this is an additional cost, because you're going to be integrating a third party, right, to make this happen. So yeah, that's also another way. Last way could be, which is, we actually, if you have, say, the user information with you, right, and you have collected their consent through some third party, like it could be through a website, it could be through like a web page form, or where you have their written documented consent, you can actually upload all those contacts through Glyphic, right? But after having said this, like we strongly encourage and we don't advise chatbots to directly initiate conversations here. We strongly encourage that even after having done this, we you collect like written consent on the chatbot flows from them and save that for a future reference, because despite all this also, it's possible that the chatbot gets reported and gets blocked. So this is something which is not as much encouraged, but that's also one of the commonly used methods that can be used to onboard users, right? Finally, moving to, so now you have your setup ready, you have tested it correctly. Now you are basically in the last leg of actually launching your pilot, right? To launch, again, there are certain things which you need to keep in mind, right? Maybe I'll speak about this later. First, I'll talk about like certain things that you should definitely keep in mind, right? uh it's important that, maybe because I spoke so much, would one of y'all like to just give a brief or one word on one thought on why do you think that we should have a pilot in the first place? Like now you've set up everything, you have already spoken to your end users as well, while like maybe creating this setup, right? So why do you think, like, I mean, we should have like a pilot, say, with a group of users? You can even put it down in the chat, or like feel free to unmute and speak as well, a smaller group. So
Checking for the edge cases.
for the edge cases, okay, could you elaborate a little more on that? Like what do you mean by edge
Like,
cases?
for an example, if there are like the consent validation that we need to take. If let's say there are some internal server issues that happen,
Mm-hmm.
and even if the user has given a consent,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes might be because of some server issue or webhook issue, that consent might not been updated to the variable. So by doing the pilot program, I can look for those edge cases, add some flow loops
Mm-hmm.
by which it can re-ask the consent if already the consent is not given, or even if the consent is given, so we can split the flow into two channels where if already the consent is taken, then okay, go
Mm-hmm.
with the normal flow. If not, then ask for the consent again. These kind of flow things that only come up when we go and test pilot with a small case of real users and also some internal testing, sometimes testing with the goal of breaking the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So for
Mm-hmm.
that, pilot is important.
Superb. I think Akash pretty much touched upon important pieces, right? Uh, Definitely, it's one opportunity for you to get a sense and identify any gaps that you have in your existing setup, right? Yeah. Sharon, I said fix problems before launching, make improvements so that the final helpful and easy. Absolutely, absolutely, right. I would say, adding to all this, what you'll have just mentioned, first major objective would be to actually even get a sense of the fact that, okay, I thought, or I created this chatbot with this particular assumption that, okay, this is something that it's going to solve. Is that indeed the case what the users also think? So basically your vision of your chatbot, is that matching to the product's perception amongst your users? That's what you're essentially going to test. The idea would not be that, okay, I need to get like say I have in mind that I need to get say 80% engagement. Only if I get 80% engagement, the pilot is successful. The idea is not to get that metric correct, but to understand that, okay, if we didn't get 80% engagement, where is it that we lack? And is there a scope to improve that and iterate and actually launch the product at all? Right. So the objective of the pilot is on those lines rather than making it a success. Right. As both of you also rightly mentioned, right, Shananya and Akash, it's one opportunity for you to also check where, so you'll largely get like groups of users, right, who are behaving as the way you expected them to behave, and like a group of users who are probably not behaving in the way you expected them to do so, right? So now what is it that your expected behavior users are doing that can be used to help help and create resources for, or mediums or channels of support for these users who are not behaving in the expected manner, right? Use those ideas to be able to implement with these set of groups. Like that's also something which you can um, understand and ideate, like using your pilot, right? And also I think this is Shananya also said this, right? Like I mean, look at any problems that come by and fix before you launch it at scale. So yeah, like I mean, if you see that, okay, maybe if it's a potential thing that you see that, okay, if I run this for a week, this is a challenge that I encountered. So that is something which you can say modify, so that that does not happen say in 2 months down the line in your actual program once you've scaled, right? So yeah, essentially those are essentially the bigger things why you would run a pilot. In terms of the process, you at the moment, so now you have, like as I said, right, we look at the objective of the pilot to learn as opposed to getting the number right, right? So you set like a realistic objective that if XYZ happens, that's like a good goal for me to call this pilot a success, right? Like say for example, if we go back at our NGO example, right, of the math skills one, a realistic objective could be that, okay, at the end of say a month, is this translating into say higher participation in the classroom for in the math class, right? Like that's like a realistic expectation that you can have, as opposed to maybe looking at the fact that, okay, how many times a user is coming to access your flow. Or you could check the fact that, okay, if you have created a chatbot flow for these group of students, at what point in the flow are they actually dropping off? Like that's a data point for you to see that, okay, they're essentially dropping off say after engaging after 2 weeks. So what could be the case? Is it the case that they don't find it engaging after or motivating enough after 2 weeks to come back and solve? Is it the fact that they find this content so too easy, that, okay, now I know after 2 weeks I know everything what you're sending to me, so I don't want to interact with you? Or is it the fact that, okay, I'm very overwhelmed with the information that you're sharing with me, because, so which is why I don't understand what you've shared with me, so I don't feel like engaging? So things like that is what you would essentially look for in making inferences from the pilot, right? So you set clear objectives. Second important thing is you fix the set of users with whom you want to conduct the pilot. Choosing these set of users is very very important. It should, you have to include like a diverse demographics, just so that you get a very clear picture of every subset of the users that you have. And like also look at like you know have them pick these users in a manner that you can easily reach out to them for feedback, because essentially all the quantitative numbers that you get from the pilot is only going to tell you the scale of the program. But why essentially that program occurred is the problem occurred is something you can figure out only if you go and speak to those users. And to be able to speak to those users, you need to be able to reach out to those users in an easy manner. So it's recommended that you pick these set of users which are of course equally distributed amongst your different metrics, which could be demographics, it could be age group, it could be region, but also account the fact that okay, can you reach out to them easily for feedback, right? Besides this, uh another thing, so now you've picked up your pilot objective, you've fixed your stratified set of users, and you've kept your setup ready to run the chatbot, right? So you essentially execute the pilot for a short period of time, right? The idea is that uh you execute it, you run it for like x number of days, which are very short, get inferences of what the results are, iterate and run that again for like another short number of days, because this is a stature for you to experiment anything and everything that you do in terms of iterations, and get a, at the end of the pilot you should have an understanding that okay, we tried xyz things, out of those xyz things this is the best combination which is scalable. That's the outcome that you would look at when you run a pilot, right? Yeah, like I mean the idea is that you in terms of timeline, you execute, infer the results, iterate, and execute again, right? And finally, like the last leg, which is most crucial, is actually collecting feedback from them, right? Collecting feedback. So as I said, like when you have uh, data that's flowing in, it's going to tell you that okay, users are dropping off at say x juncture, but it's not going to tell you what is making them drop off. To understand that what, to understand why they did this, it's very important. The only way you can do that is actually speak to them, right? There are multiple ways that you can reach out to users and conduct this sort of like a qualitative feedback cycle. Most common one is like actually you go on ground and you speak to them one on one, like have a set of questions prepared and speak to them one on one to understand why did they interact with the chatbot in the manner that they did. Second thing what you could do, in again which is a little time effective, is that you hold focus group discussions with a group of users who are easily reachable, right? You essentially are doing the same exercise but you're doing it with a group of users. And the last thing, which is also highly which we encourage, is analyze their chats. The users that you've picked and you want to collect the feedback from, look through their chats on Glyphic, because the way they have interacted with their chatbot will give you a good amount of insights on why they did how they did it, right? So yeah, like these are xyz set of things which you could try to collect qualitative feedback on. Another opportunity would be, if you're already going on ground, actually have them use the chatbot in front of you, so that will give you a first hand insight on okay, like I mean ideally you would want them to say uh, click on this button, right? Or like say one common thing which I also noticed very fairly frequently is the fact that, so now you have a message that's sent and you're expecting a user to reply, right, to that message. A lot of what users could do is that you actually reply to the message that's sent by the chatbot. Like that's a user behavior which is different from what you anticipated, which in essence from a touch point of view is more difficult as well, right? Because the user is doing two touch points. You're actually selecting the message to reply and then typing the message and replying back. So things like that is something you can only infer from analyzing the chats, right? To do all this, another important thing that needs to be fixed is that you have a fixed set of questions that you ask your set of users, right? You don't change the questions very much, like I mean when you are speaking to a set of users, because if you keep that consistent, it will be easier for you to draw like a qualitative inference, right, on the data that you've collected. And never ask leading questions to your users unless you're really prompting them to do. Like say for example, if you ask a user how did you like the chatbot, how did you find the chatbot, instead of asking did you like the chatbot, because then you're prompting the user to think why did they like it in your second question. But in the first one you're prompting them to answer whether they really liked it or not. So don't never include leading questions of these sorts, because that would essentially include bias in the responses that you will receive from your end users, right? But yeah, that's essentially about collecting good qualitative feedback for you to be able to draw inferences and look at scaling, right? Moving to the last bit, which is basically scaling your program, right? So now you have at the end of the pilot you have like a combination that is ready to use, saying that okay, if I make these are the changes, these are the final set of iterations, and this is the product that's possibly ready to scale. There are certain things that you would need to like keep in mind when you go about doing this, right? First, very obvious and very intuitive thing is the fact that when you scale, you have to make sure that you don't compromise on your quality, right, of the content that you're sharing with your end users. So it's not about scaling, is not essentially about reaching more users. It's about growing the reach without say compromising the quality, right? So that's something which needs to be kept in mind when you look at scaling. And the second of this thing is budgeting, right? Like, because running a chatbot is essentially going to majorly involve two things. One is your cost, some of which will be fixed, which is because of the product being technical. And the second thing are the people who are going to be actually executing this, right? Like, so those both of them are something which you need to look at hand in hand when you're looking at like scaling the chatbot. Because when it comes to technicalities, like technical costing, some of it is fixed, like so you pay like a fixed cost to Glyphic, right, for the platform. That's something which is fixed. But you will have like some cost which is variable, which is say your Gupshup, which you will pay to Gupshup, which will potentially change when the number of users that you interact with will change. Then you have a certain cost that is involved on storing your data on GCS, right? Which is also going to change when say more or less data comes in, when when your user base changes, right? So those are some technical costs that you definitely have to bear. But like in terms of people, like I mean, you when you scale a program across like say different demographics, it could also be that you use one chatbot, but has the chatbot has like say several programs, right? So scaling that will involve strategizing, and strategizing will come from the people, right? So those are like additional costs that you would want to like keep in mind. Like if in case if you have like in some use cases, right, where the reach is like really high, you look at it like say over a lakh, or will not put a number, but like when the reach is very high, you actually have a group of people who are actually working on the chatbot in the first place, right? One being the person who actually puts the tech together, basically designing your flows, putting your flows into the format that it can be sent out through a chatbot. But like you also have like a content management team who basically give you the content that needs to be sent out through your chatbot. And you'll have like a separate M&E team who is doing like the M&E of the program given your chatbot's data. So like in case like your program is at that scale, like this is also some of the people, a fairly large group of people that get involved into running a chatbot program in due course, right? So yeah, that's about scaling the program. That makes us come to the end of the webinar, and we're fairly close on time, and that's something very happy about. So yeah, but this is essentially how your roadmap of like running a chatbot program would look like. Yeah, I can take a pause for any questions, any thoughts, any comments, anything that you would like to share. um yeah, so over to the audience. You can put on the chat as well, like if you feel like that's something it's more easier.
I have one question, and
Yes, Akash.
that is uh, for us when we are designing this, designing our few pros and that's testing process. Uh, let's say a conversation is happening,
Mm-hmm.
and user puts some ambiguous input. Now, to
Mm-hmm.
handle that ambiguity, it is like tough for me to understand like how would I handle that ambiguity. I have seen that there are some GPT integration. So can something be done? Let's just say a GPT listener, which was listens through or checks through the whole conversation. When those kind of ambiguity occurs, it understand that and try to give a response. Let's just say this is not the input that we expected, or something meaningful that will tell the user that this is not a proper input. So we would like to give us, like, you give us a proper it. Is there some way to do that?
Okay, so Akash, if I understand your question correct, now this ambiguous answer that comes is in place of an expected answer, is it?
Yes,
Or like,
yes, yes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay, so like say, so to give again for sake of simplicity, like you mean say you have like an interactive message with say buttons. Instead of those three buttons, there is something else that the user responds.
Yeah, something like that. But even like if I add a flow, like let's just say branch that conversation into with the other something else. But even sometime, let's just say a string of words that doesn't mean it. I'm talking about that kind of stuff that can happen. Let's just say for our target audience, it's predominantly our Bengalis.
Mm-hmm.
So, and generally the way they type answer, they don't use the Bengali letters. They use English letters and construct the sentence into Bengali. So,
Mm-hmm.
this, so handling those ambiguous stuff for us, that is getting a little complicated.
Okay, you mean like small talk, like people will just send hi,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. That, and also let's just say we are putting out responses on to something, like for us we want to put out educational content. So let's just say we gave the user a prompt, like what age your child is, and
Mm-hmm.
that's get translated into Bengali, and we have options like age 3, age 4, or something like that, and the
Mm-hmm.
user response come amar bachar boyos 3. Now, these kind of things are ambiguous for the child because it's like a very if else kind of thing that the flows are going. So, how would I handle those ambiguous?
Understood. Understood. Could you like, I mean, I think you've shared. Could you put down your org's name also? I'll maybe
Uh,
check through the flows and get back to
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Like,
It's on to Hinaba.
Andinaba. Okay. Let me like look at the flows and get back to you on this because
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not being able to visualize what you're trying to ask, but I fairly
Yeah,
get an idea.
it's a very tough thing to visualize. I also can understand that. Like,
Sure. Let me like I'm noted down your.
and also like there is another thing that I wanted to ask you is that the whole that GPT integration that you guys have, like
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like I haven't seen any separate nodes for any like GPT integration. So how would I add GPT into it?
Yeah, so you basically create like OpenAI assistants like on from the Glyphic UI itself. I'm sharing you the documentation on the chat.
Yeah,
You can
that would be
access.
great.
Yeah, I'll share that one second. But yeah, thank you so much for the questions. In case we have any more questions, I think people can stay back. Else, I'm just pushing a poll. I would just request participants to fill that out and like I mean to leave. Yeah. I and in the meanwhile I'm sending you the documentation link.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, I see.
feel free to drop off, guys. Like if in case any questions, you can definitely stay back. Else, yeah. And
Okay,
also send
so
out.
so so I just have one more question. So to do
Yeah,
this GPT integration, we have to do a separate web call.
right. That's right. You first create
Ah,
your assistant on the AI Glyphic UI only, and then call that assistant using call a webhook node.
okay. And the vector database that I've seen, like I have also seen that. So the vector database is pre-uploaded right now. So can we upload our own vector database based on our whole
You mean
knowledge base
files,
that
right? Knowledge base,
yeah,
files for
yeah,
the
yeah,
knowledge.
knowledge base.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
At the time of creating the assistant, you can upload the files that you want that assistant to look for, as in the knowledge base.
Okay.
I can
Thank
let
you.
me see if there is a separate documentation on just assistants, creating an assistant. You should be able to find information there as well. Okay, yeah, it's in the first bit itself,
Yeah,
like the
yeah,
doc.
I checked the document. That yeah, uh, I will go through it, and if I
Thanks,
have any
Tanu.
more question, I will drop it on this.
Great. I will
Thank you.
send out the like deck over email to all of you.
Okay. Okay.
Please fill the feedback, Akash.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
have.
I did. I did.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.